everybody, so this is day one of our 1-point perspective project. I like to call this one exploding shapes. And so we are trying to give the impression that these shapes are coming out at us from outer space or from somewhere very far away. And we'll get a little bit more into the perspective part in our next lesson. So for day one, we're going to keep it pretty simple. We're just going to be making our shapes. We are not going to be drawing any of these lines. We'll talk about that later. So don't let yourself get too anxious to do this without hearing the next lesson, because you might end up doing something incorrectly and having to start over again. So just our shapes today, and so I'll show you where to stop. I'm going to put this aside. We're going to have lots of options for adding color to this project. If you have wet media, and by wet media I'm kind of talking about watercolors or some other type of paint, or if you want to use our technique that we tried before with the markers and adding a little bit of water to it. Heavier paper is a little bit easier to deal with, so it doesn't get too wrinkled up. If you don't have heavier paper, just whatever paper you have. This is some copy paper, that would work fine. Some of you have just notebook paper with the lines, that will work too. We'll just try to ignore those extra lines if you're using that. But if you're going with those, you might want to stick with colored pencils or crayons for your color. It's just going to be a little bit more easy to not let your paper get super wet. Let's see, here's my pencil hiding under there. I just grabbed this spool of thread because it's a little round thing, so you can see on mine I do have some circles. And so you don't have to make your shapes perfect. We are worried a little bit more about making, we're not worried, but we have a little more concern about doing things correctly after this step. So I'm just going to start by putting a little dot in the center of my paper. That's going to be our vanishing point, and we'll talk about that more later. So around your vanishing point is when you're going to draw your shapes. And so I'm just going to put a couple of circles so I can show you how to deal with the rounded shapes. Let's see, we'll just put another one over here. And after that, you can draw, just make up shapes. So on my sample, all of the shapes I did, let's see, triangles, stars, hearts. I did kind of a lightning bolt shape. Most of these are just free-handed. I did not, except for the circles, I didn't actually trace anything, and I didn't even use a straight edge for the shapes, but we will need a straight edge tomorrow, and that could be simply just another piece of paper or a piece of cardboard, or a ruler's ideal if you have that, but not necessary. So now what I'm going to do, and if you're somebody that is a perfectionist, if you want to use a straight edge to draw your shapes, you can. But I'm just going to draw some shapes in here around. That is not a perfect star. So again, don't go for perfection, that's fine. And if you want to add stars and you do the kind that's like the ones where you go do all those crossing lines, you can erase the lines or color on top of the lines inside, that's fine. You can just think about triangles. You can even just make up any kind of shapes. They don't have to be necessarily parallelograms, ovals, you know, trapezoids, anything that's specific. It can be just any kind of shape you want to do. And let's see, I did have some hearts in the other one. That is an interesting one to draw the perspective lines from. And I'm going to make sure some of mine do overlap a bit. And by overlap, I don't mean on top of each other. Let me make sure I get that straight with you. I mean that when I'm drawing my lines, some of these lines are going to have to cross over each other. So that's what I meant by that. That might have been slightly confusing. So just drawing in some shapes. Let's see, I think I'll put another sort of a sideways heart over here. And I just think I'll add one more over here, and we'll just do a good old rectangle, square kind of shape. And so I have these shapes on here now. And so to keep things simple for tomorrow, or whenever day we come back to this, we're gonna add some color into our shapes. So that's gonna help us with our next step. It's just gonna kind of help you know where to stop your lines. So this is where those materials come in, anything you wanna use. I'm going to pull out my watercolors here. And let's see, here's my paintbrush, I'll use this one. So I have some watercolors here. If you're using watercolors to paint in your shapes, then that does just take a little more, just being careful. And let's see here, how am I gonna fit this in? I think I'll put it right here. All right, so you can see this is a nice big set. I actually just got it at Sam's Club for pretty cheap, and they're pretty good paints. So I'm just gonna get some of my paint on my brush. With watercolors, you really do not want them to be thick and pasty or heavy. Watercolors should always be thin and kind of transparent. You should be able to see a little bit through them. Let's see, I'll do the star. And let's see, my hands are not as steady as they once were, so you can see I got a little bit out of the line there. No worries there. So I'm just gonna paint this one shape in here with this, and I'll show you some of the options we probably don't have to demonstrate. You guys know how to color with crayons and colored pencils. You want to do it nice and neat. And so again, nice wet brush. Whenever it's scratchy or looking dry, you probably need more water. So I'm just gonna fill that in, straighten out maybe my edge here a little bit. All right, so, and of course, if I'm changing colors, I would wash my brush. Something important to remember, if you're using wet media, if you're painting, don't hold it up sideways if it is really wet, as it probably will be if you're using watercolors. It needs to dry flat. And if you're using it in a sketchbook, kind of like I did this one, I just left this open to dry. I did not close the sketchbook up. I just left it open. So again, use anything you want. If I'm gonna go for markers here, a nice way, let's see, let me get a different color. I grabbed the blue again. So nice neat coloring again. I want to outline my shape first. That's going to help keep my edges neat. And a little coloring trick with markers, this flat part, if you let that part do the work for you instead of trying to color with this point, you can see that would take a while. So this is going to keep it neater and save you a little bit of time. And also keeps your tip from getting too flattened out. Whoops, you see what I did? I put my hand right on that. We are not going to worry about that right now. I'll see if I can clean that up in a bit. So color all your shapes with whichever kind of media you'd like to use, and then let it dry. We're not doing anything else from that point on. And a way to avoid the mistake that I made probably would be, if I'm painting, I would probably start at the top and work my way down. That way my hand's not going to be overlapping or, you know, touching the paper. I could also rotate my paper around to get that out of the way. So you can learn from the mistake that I made right there with that shape. All right, so I will see you later.